If you're like me, then you might have grown up exploring the mansion hidden within the forest, or maybe you had to deal with the beasts from the shadows. Fast forward to 2017, and now you have a whole new generation of fans who might not even know what a traditional Zelda dungeon is. The franchise had to adapt to the industry in order to stay relevant, and I think it's safe to say by now that they've been successful by capturing a whole new audience while also maintaining its core base, even though many might be disappointed with some of these changes. One of the biggest criticisms by far in Breath of the Wild was its lack of classic dungeons, and Tears of the Kingdom seems to loosely go back to that, except not really. Luckily for me, being a fan of the traditional style, it was kind of what I was expecting. The dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom, in my opinion, are an attempt to keep the new base while also catering to the old base. Now, I've only completed the first 4 main dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm actually currently at Hyrule Castle at the time of this video, and to be honest, they've left me both pleasantly surprised and disappointed at the same time. But after waiting roughly 6 to 7 years for Zelda's newest installment, would you say that you're satisfied with the dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom? Because I prefer to end my videos on a positive note, I want to speak on some things that I took issue with when playing through these temples. Keep in mind this is my opinion, and a big reason I wanted to make this video is because I'm always seeing complete opposite opinions on this topic. So I'd like to open up the grounds for conversation and to spark more discussion. Whether you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments, although something I'm sure most of us can agree on is that the temples in Tears of the Kingdom, I believe, lacked an enemy variety. Pretty much every dungeon had the same cycle of construct captains and soldiers, as well as the elemental themed choo-choo. Genuinely, I don't believe there's anything else besides maybe the occasional like, except for the Lightning Temple, which had the Gibdos. I definitely wish I saw more of this heavy theming outside of just the Lightning Temple, but this dungeon was still missing something that can make a huge difference, and that's the soundtrack. Not a single one of these temples has a standout theme, as they decided to go with more ambience rather than music, which isn't by any means a bad thing. But nobody will remember any of these themes in 5 years, while you have soundtracks like this, which have remained alive since 1998. I'm not sure why, but I was expecting the return of more classic sounding themes, which isn't too unreasonable considering the game has a great soundtrack. I quite literally just finished playing the Lightning Temple and probably wouldn't recognize the theme if I heard it. Dungeon themes have been a huge staple to the franchise, and for the time being, it seems that this has been abandoned and placed with more natural sounding ambience. The positive side to this, though, that I didn't even notice until playing through the Fire Temple was the progression of the soundtrack. After ringing 2 of the gauntlets, I noticed a change in the music. It began to pick up the pace and the urgency. When I was completing the last puzzle of the Water Temple, I even noticed a change in the skyline that complemented this change of music. It was very subtle, but still noticeable and a great little detail. Despite me preferring to have a more theme-based tune, I can't deny that I do still enjoy these progressing soundtracks. Zelda dungeons are known for their puzzles, and Tears of the Kingdom offers you plenty of freedom in choosing how you solve its puzzles. Although I did find one issue with them. When completing some of these, I was reminded of shrines that I had already done. For example, the primary goal in the Lightning Temple is to, no surprise, light up the temple. And to do this, you need to find hidden areas of light and use the mirrors. Although given the setting, it does make sense to do this, and it really did remind me of the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time. However, I was also reminded of the shrine that I just completed not too long ago involving a similar puzzle. This to me made it feel a bit less original and more like completing a few shrine puzzles in a different setting. Each dungeon is structured this way. They all involve puzzles that consist of shrines that you might have already done. That's not to say I didn't enjoy them, as they're not identical to the shrines, and because it takes place in a more organic setting, it makes solving them more difficult in my opinion. I spent way too much time in the Water Temple literally just running around this bubble. I even thought putting a fan on it would make it move for some reason. Eventually, I made it up in a pretty unconventional manner. I loved the freedom of choice I got when trying to solve these. However, in the end, I still felt that these dungeons played more like one large shrine rather than an actual temple. I also found the general atmosphere of these to be fairly disappointing. I'm not talking about the setting that these dungeons are in, but rather the dungeon itself. The Wind Temple is just a large ship, and honestly, this one felt like a Divine Beast more than anything else. The Fire Temple at a glance looks like a gigantic interconnected building, but after exploring it, I started to forget I was technically in one of the temples as you spend most of your time just hopping around on a cart. The Water Temple, in all honesty, felt more just like an add-on to the Sky Islands, as it was a bit too open-ended in my opinion. And even though the Lightning Temple gives you that sense of isolation, I started to notice that it just feels tiny, like the whole thing is basically this one large room with a few hidden paths. You're probably wondering by now if I even have anything good to say about the dungeons, but personally, I think the build-ups and the settings of these are some of the best in the entire Zelda franchise. You begin each mission in a given region that is experiencing some sort of hardship that impacts the community. You have to team up with the Sage's descendants to help find the source of this and put an end to it. Unlike many of the classic games which usually had you hopping from temple to temple minus Majora's Mask, these journeys are lengthy and require you to utilize your partner's abilities as a way to prepare you for the temple itself, whether it be heading to the depths of Death Mountain or fighting waves of Gyptos and Gerudo. And because I had a great time with these missions, it made the dungeon that much more enjoyable. It might not be fair to group the pre-dungeon experience with the actual temple, however to me it kind of blends into one large mission with the dungeon being the climax of it. In addition to the build-up, I found the settings of these dungeons to be great. You have a flying ship in the center of a large blizzard, you have an abandoned underground city at the heart of a volcano, you have a temple hidden at the highest point in the sky, and you have a pyramid structure hidden beneath the sand. The locations of these dungeons are perfect in my opinion and flow great with the story. My critique is more of the presentation of them, as they're a lot more dull on the inside. I do wish some of these dungeons were a bit more closed off like the Lightning Temple, which even gives that classic feel at the beginning of it. It starts more linear as you have to dodge booby traps, fight Gyptos, and solve some organic puzzles before entering the main room. However, I still can't deny the beauty of being up in the sky of the Water Temple. There's pros and cons to the dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom, but as I mentioned, the build-up is what made these, and the bosses are what tipped the scale. I'm not going to go into too much detail here from a gameplay standpoint, and even though I didn't find them to be too challenging, I found each one to be much better than any of the Blight Ganons. These are the classic Zelda boss designs that I was hoping to see. They brought back the large, frightening monsters that have been a staple to the franchise. I mentioned in a previous video that Zelda bosses have traditionally never been too challenging, but that they're remembered for their scale, and these deliver on that. You are quite literally fighting the source of what's plaguing the people of Hyrule, and more specifically, your whole journey is designed around finding and destroying this source so it's always in the back of your mind. In Gerudo, you even get to face Queen Gypto before entering the temple, which is something I've always enjoyed in Zelda games. It gives you a little taste of what to expect later, and once you finally defeat her, the desert storm dissipates and the Gyptos clear the area, allowing the Gerudo to return to their normal lives. Between speaking with the people, discovering the phenomenon, journeying to the temple, completing the temple, and defeating the boss, I found the dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom to be some of the most immersive in the entire franchise. These might not have been what many of you were looking for. You might have been expecting more key-gated doors and traditional puzzles. However, the classic style bosses made their return along with themed temples, even if they did come off as a bit dull. The developers of Tears of the Kingdom compromised. They gave those who love Breath of the Wild that sense of freedom, while also bringing back aspects of some of the classic dungeons. Overall, I'd say I'm satisfied with these new temples, and even though I'm personally a fan of the traditional formula, I can't deny that I had a great time with them, and I'm hoping to see a temple in DLC in the distant future as there is so much to do as is. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom, and do stick around as I plan to make a plentiful amount of videos on the game that I might even combine into one large review. I seem to lack the patience to create an hour-long video and prefer to separate them by topic, as there's a lot to discuss about the game. With that being said, enjoy the outro, and until next time.